Okay, let's turn to Revelation 13. It is good to see Daisy back. Welcome home. Also got a call from Patrick Evans this afternoon. He's back in town. He had been traveling, and he said to tell everyone that he's missed them, and we've missed him too. He should be here Sunday. So, Revelation chapter 13 is extremely important for understanding the book of Revelation as a whole. And so we're going to take some time tonight, and it'll probably go into next week as well, to look at this chapter. We were in chapter 12, of course, last week. And chapter 12 is also a pivotal chapter in the book because we are introduced to the dragon, who we found is Satan. And we saw in chapter 12 the failure of Satan again and again, because remember, as the chapter opens, he's there waiting to devour this child that was being born, who we found out was Jesus Christ. And so Satan tried to thwart the birth of Jesus, and yet he was defeated, wasn't he? And then there's this war in heaven, and the dragon is thrown down. And what was the significance of that? The war between Michael and his angels and the devil and his angels. In what sense was he thrown down? What does it mean? Remember what it says. Yeah, but he's no longer able to what? To accuse, right? To accuse the saints. And that's what Satan does. He accuses the saints. But because of the work of Jesus on the cross, he's no longer able to do that. There's no accusations that he can bring because our sins have been washed away. So you're seeing this picture of the work of salvation kind of from heaven's perspective. So the devil is thrown down, there's great rejoicing in heaven, but he says, woe to the earth, because the devil has come down with great wrath. And he comes down, and what does he do when he's thrown down to the earth? Say again, Don?
He pursues the woman and the child.
Yeah, he's going to make war against the woman, and he's pictured as chasing after her. He lets this flood come out of his mouth. But the Lord takes care of that. Satan is thwarted again. And then it says, though, that he is going to make war against the rest of her children. And he is enraged. And who are her children? Look at chapter 12 and verse 17. How are her children described, and who are they? Those who keep the commandments of God and... That's right. So who are we talking about? Christians. The children of the woman. And the woman was the people of God who brought the Savior into the world. And we're part of that lineage. And so Satan is trying his hardest to stop the work of Christ. He's failed and he's failed, but there's one more thing he can do. What if he can get to the followers of Jesus? And what if he can stamp out anything about Jesus from history? What if through persecution he can stop this saving message? Because if no one is told the message, then Satan can win. And so he begins to make war. And how does he do that? That's how we come across, how we come up to chapter 13. Bob, is this mic muted? I'm getting a little feedback. I wonder if that's what's causing it. You may turn me down just a nudge. Thank you. So that brings us to chapter 13. How's the volume now? Can y'all hear me in the back? Okay. Right. But Jesus let Satan go about doing what he's doing for a time. And that's where we get into chapter 13. So let's read. Before we read, let me show you where we're headed. I'm just going to put the whole outline up for you because it gets kind of complicated, and I want you to see where we're going. We're going to see the sea beast in chapter 13, and we're also going to see a beast come up out of the land. That'll probably be next week. And so we'll talk about what he looks like. It talks about a wound that this sea beast has that becomes very important. We'll talk about what he does, his actions. But then we'll ask the question, who is this sea beast? And in order to determine that, because it's not like chapter 12 where it just comes out and says the dragon is the devil and Satan, just flatly tells us. We're going to have to put some clues together in chapter 13. So we're going to use clues from the Old Testament, specifically Daniel chapter 7. And we're also going to look at a lot of very strong clues from Revelation chapter 17. So we're going to look forward a little bit into the book. Remember, one of the rules about understanding Revelation is to keep reading. Keep reading. And as we get into chapter 17, a lot of things are going to start to be elucidated for us. All right, so let's look at verse 1 of chapter 13. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. So let's just describe the beast. What do we know about him? I mean, the sea beast. Let's just list some things off. What do we know? Okay, 10 horns, 7 heads. Yeah, what's a diadem? It's a crown, right? So what does that indicate to us? On his horns, yeah. So it's kingliness, royalty in a sense. What else do you know? 7 heads, right? Blasphemous names written on his heads. Yeah. So you start to learn about him. Remember, we're painting pictures in Revelation. This is someone or something that is against God. Blasphemous names. Powerful. What do you learn in verse 2? Yeah, kind of hard to picture, isn't it? Not pretty, yeah. So, a leopard, parts of it are like a leopard, parts like a bear, parts like a lion. The mouth is like a lion. And then there's a very important clue at the end of verse 2. Where does he get his power? From Satan, from the dragon. And the dragon gave him power and a throne, his throne, and great authority. So, very powerful, very much against God. Well, let's look at verses 3 and 4. I heard a light bulb go off over here.
Yeah, so if you read the next sentence down, is that from, it's war with
Good thought.
Because it says he's wounded.
I think this comes after, and I'll show you why I think that in a moment. That's a good thought. Good question. So, verse 3 says, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. Fatal wound. One of the heads had a wound, fatal, but it was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast? And who is able to wage war with him? So the world is very impressed, right? They're very enamored with the beast. They worship the beast. And then look at verse 5. And remember, in 3 and 4, this is going to come back to be a big clue for us. That one of the heads had a wound. It was fatal. But then there's a coming back to life, if you will, of this beast, as we'll see. Look at verse 5. There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And then verse 8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. So everyone worships him except who? Those who are in the book of life, the Christians. So, notice that for the beast it's given to him to make war with the saints. And what else? To overcome them, right? To wage war with them. And he has, look at the end of verse 5, the authority to act for 42 months. And we've seen that time period before, right? What does that indicate to us in the book of Revelation? 42 months. Or 3.5 years, or 1,260 days. Do you remember? Persecution, right. It's always a time of persecution. It's, I don't believe, a literal 1,260 days or 42 months, but it's saying there's going to be this definite time. It's not going to be 1,000 years. It's not going to be a day, but there's going to be this definite period of time that will come to an end. And it's going to be a time of persecution. And that fits the context here, doesn't it? It's going to be a time of persecution, but it's also a time when God is sustaining and helping his saints. And so we see a lot of clues here as to the identity of the sea beast. But so far, I would say it's not conclusive. Would you agree with that? It's not conclusive who this is yet. But let's keep digging and see what else Revelation tells us, and let's see what we can learn from our knowledge of the Old Testament. So let's start with the Old Testament first. What you see here in Revelation 13 is very similar to something that you read in Daniel chapter 7. So let's keep our place, but turn back to Daniel 7. Sorry? 7. Yeah. Just a coincidence here, but yeah, Daniel 7. But we will see the number 7 come up in Daniel chapter 7. So, in this chapter, Daniel has a vision, and he sees, if you look at Daniel 7 and verse 3, what does he see? Yeah, 4 great beasts coming up from where? From the sea. Sounds familiar, right? What are they like? Yeah. Look at verse 4. One is like a lion, right? Right? Wings of an eagle. And what's the second beast like? In verse 5. It's like a bear. Yeah. Right. You've got the bear, you've got the lion that we saw in Revelation. And what about the third beast? Verse 6. It's a leopard. So we have the same animals, don't we? Leopard, bear, lion. Now, look at verse 7. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Again, does that sound familiar? Very much, right? While I was contemplating the horns, this is important in verse 8, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Blasphemous, arrogant. But you see these 10 horns, and another little horn comes up, and what does that little horn do? It uproots 3. So where we had 10 horns, we end up with how many? 8, right? Because 1 comes in, but it uproots 3. So you end up with 8 horns. Just keep that in the back of your mind for a moment. We end up with, from 10, we end up with 8 horns. Now, come over to Daniel 7, verse 19. Daniel is very troubled by this, as anyone would be, and he really wants to know what is the identity of that fourth beast, who was extremely terrifying. And that fourth beast seemed to be made up of the other beasts. I say that because verse 12 says, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them. This extension of life probably is meant to be understood as within the fourth beast, that the fourth beast kind of takes in some of the characteristics of the other 3. So look at verse 19. This is Daniel speaking. He says, then I desired to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boast, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. Sound familiar? We just saw that in Revelation 13. Waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Now we get the explanation. Look at verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth. That's really important. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread down and crush it. And what are the 10 horns about? Look at verse 24. What are the 10 horns? 10 kings. Horns are often, or maybe always in Daniel, about power, about kings, rulers. So the 10 horns are 10 kings out of this kingdom. And then he says in verse 24, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for how long? Times and a half time. 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days. And so I think we can say this is extremely similar to Revelation 13. So in Daniel, we see, what is this fourth empire? I'll just ruin the plot for you now and say it's Rome. How do we know that? Well, you look back in Daniel chapter 2, and there were 4 kingdoms that were going to come. Daniel was living under the Babylonian kingdom, and then the next world empire was the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks. And who came after the Greeks? It was the Romans. And in the time of the Romans, in Daniel chapter 2, it says that's when God's everlasting kingdom will come in, as this rock that crushes all the other kingdoms. So it's in the Roman time of the Romans that Christ is born and Christ accomplishes his work, and his kingdom is established on earth in the church, which is part of his kingdom. So we see here this beast that has 10 horns, which are kings, which becomes 8 kings. And this beast makes war against the people of God and appears to be winning, but ultimately who wins? God. God always wins. So let's pause there. Any questions on Daniel 7 before we go back to Revelation? We're going to try to tie all this together at the end, I promise. Daniel was before Christ. Yeah, Daniel was BC. Yeah, yeah. Right. That's right. So let's go back to Revelation. But let's go back to Revelation 17 for more clues about who the sea beast is. Revelation 17. Look at verse 3. John is wanting to know, like Daniel, what is this? What is this beast? And he's going to get an explanation here. So verse 3, and he carried me away in the Spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Is this the same beast? Yeah, 7 heads, 10 horns. Let's hold off on who the woman is for a moment, but drop down to verse 7. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. That's nice, right? He's going to tell us. Verse 8. The beast you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, those whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast, that he was and is not and will come. This is an important clue. The beast was, but what about as John writes? The beast is not, but what happens next? Yeah, he's to come. He's coming again out of the abyss. He was and is not, and he will be coming again. Just hold on to that. We'll get back to it. Now look at verse 9. What are the 7 heads, according to verse 9 of the beast? 7 hills on which the woman sits. And as you look in history, we can see anywhere that you look in history books, Rome was built on 7 hills, 7 mountains. So who are we talking about here? We're talking about this woman. The woman is Rome, the city of Rome, that sits upon this beast, the Roman Empire. So the 7 heads are the 7 mountains. But what else are the 7 heads, according to verse 10? 7 kings. Oh, this is good. Listen to what he says. There's a lot you can learn from this. There's 7 kings, and he says 5 have fallen. As John writes, 5 have fallen. 1 is. The other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. So the 7 heads are 7 kings, or 7 emperors, as we would say. And as John writes, 5 of them have fallen. 1 of them is currently in power, and there's another one that has not yet come. When he comes, he must remain a little while. But keep reading. Verse 11, the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. That's kind of a mouthful there. Just process verse 11 for a minute. The beast, which was and is not, so the beast died and came back to life, or at least appeared to. The beast that was and is not is himself also an 8th. An 8th what? An 8th king, an 8th head. So the beast is going to come back again, sort of embodied in an 8th head. And this 8th head, he says, is one of the 7. It's another king. It's another emperor that is coming. And what's going to happen? The beast is going to go to destruction. Right? And then we'll get to the 10 horns probably next week in verse 12. But let's just focus on these heads for a moment. Now take a look at this chart. This came out of Jim McGuigan's commentary on Revelation. And I think it's very helpful because we have a side-by-side comparison of what we just read in Daniel 7 and what we're seeing in Revelation 13 and 17. So where Daniel talks about horns as kings, John is talking about heads as kings, so there's a little bit of a difference there. Where Daniel had 11 kings that turned into 8 because 3 were uprooted by the 11th. So where Daniel sees 11 kings turning into 8 kings, John just writes about 8 kings. And where Daniel looks forward in time, and he talks about, in this order, the lion, the bear, and the leopard, John is looking back in time from his perspective and talks about leopard, bear, and lion. Greece, the Medes and Persians, and the Babylonians. But as John writes, we're in the 4th kingdom. We're in the Roman Empire, that terrible, dreadful, terrifying beast. And so, looking at this slide here, we're listing the Roman emperors. And you might ask, if you know history, why aren't we starting with Julius Caesar as number one. Well, Julius was part of the Roman Republic. He was never an emperor. There was no such title when he lived. That came after him. And so the first Roman emperor was Augustus Caesar. And interesting here, you have 11 kings listed, just like we had 11 horns in Daniel. But remember, 3 of them were uprooted. And so the theory here is, and I think it's a very good one, these 3 emperors, if you look back in history, they call it the year of 4 emperors. There was this horrible civil war, the First Roman Civil War, and you had 4 emperors all ruling within the space of 1 year. So Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, none of them reigned for more than a few months. And they were either killed or they committed suicide. It was just a very tumultuous time. And so these 3, what I'm proposing to you is that John just doesn't even talk about them because they were uprooted. They were uprooted in Daniel. So he just talks about eight heads, where Daniel talks about 11, but 3 of them are uprooted by the one. Is that clear as mud? Yeah? Okay. What questions do you have? So Daniel, when we get rid of these 3, we're down to 8. And in John, we have 8. Daniel talks about horns. John describes them as heads. But they're both of this terrible beast of the Roman Empire. I know it's a lot to take in. Questions? Tammy?
Well, I correlate that with our own history of the U.S. I mean, we had certain presidents that were short-term like that, and they aren't very well talked about very often. So you tend to forget those.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, they were very short-lived reigns of these people. That's just a few months at the most. I'm just letting you process for a minute. So I've looked at this a lot and had time to process, and you haven't. So remember what John said in chapter 17. 5 have fallen, as he writes. 1 is. There's another one coming that must remain for a little while. In this chart, that would be Titus. Titus reigned for 2.5 years. He reigned for a little while. And then we have Domitian. But, so as John writes, 5 have fallen, 1 is. That would indicate that he's writing during the reign of Vespasian, which was 69 to 79 AD, which I think is pretty cool that you can kind of nail down probably the date that this is written, 69 to 79 AD. Titus comes along and reigns for 2.5 years. But then what was special about this 8th? Look back at Revelation 17 again. Look at verse 11. Revelation 17:11 again. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th and is one of the 7. And he goes to destruction. The beast that was and is not. You remember anything about Nero? Could he be described as the beast that was? You remember what kind of guy he was? He was real mean, and he persecuted Christians terribly. And what do you see there? The dragon waging war against the people of God through the beast. The beast was in Nero. He was a persecutor of Christians. And then, as John writes, the beast is not. And you can look back in history and see, during the reigns of Vespasian and Titus, Christians weren't persecuted as in terms of a policy of the Roman Empire. There was local persecution, there was persecution from the Jews, etc. But you look in history, and I have some references I can share with you if you're interested. Historians from back in the 1st and 2nd century, they say these two didn't persecute Christians. So the beast was and is not, but then what happened with Domitian? Terrible persecution again. So the beast is back. The beast is back in the form of Domitian, the 8th head. And Domitian kicks off a persecution that lasts for like 200 years of Christians. And so we're getting these very strong clues that the beast that comes up out of the sea is the Roman Empire. And they are persecuting Christians. And John is telling them, the dragon is after you. The dragon wants to destroy you. He's already done it in Nero. Now you're having this reprieve right now, but he's coming back again. And it's like, and people thought this at the time, as I read in history, they thought that Domitian was Nero resurrected because he just continued the policies of Nero. And so the beast is back. And Domitian, let me get the reign of Domitian for you. Domitian reigned from 81 to 96 AD. So if John is writing in the 70s under Vespasian, you've got just a few years before this comes back. And remember what we read about in the book right off the bat. These are things that must soon take place. The time is near. Don't seal up the prophecy. This was things that the people of God were going to have to understand, and they were going to have to know. This is coming. It's going to be hard. It's going to be for a defined period of time. But what's the overall message? God wins. Be faithful to Jesus until death, and you will win if you hold on to him. You may lose your life, but you will win. You may be persecuted, but you will win. And it was coming soon. They needed to know this. Be faithful until death. Find victory in Jesus. And is there application there for us as well? Might the beast come back in some kind of form? Persecution through the government, through the authorities? It could happen. We need to be ready. We need to be ready to hold on to Jesus with everything we have. So next week we're going to discuss the second beast that comes up out of the land in chapter 13. And we'll look at the infamous 666 a little bit next week, the mark of the beast. And hopefully this was helpful to you. It's kind of a fire hose, I know. But any questions before we close or comments? Jim?
I think I'm correct in saying this. You might wonder, well, why the persecution? And my reading says that they're developed within Roman hierarchy, emperor worship.
Yes.
And it became a religion unto itself. And when Christians refused to make offerings and so forth and to acknowledge that was a prime reason for persecution.
Yeah. And you're,
So one of the questions you said was, that's learn about today. If you look around at some of the woke philosophy that's being promulgated throughout society, we're not very far away from being asked to worship certain things
right.
that are not right.
Yeah. I think the Dragon's playbook is similar to what it always has been. And so there's great application here for us. And what you said about emperor worship, that goes right to the heart of who the land beast is, the second beast. And we'll see that next week. Appreciate your attention and your comments. Let's close together in a prayer.